morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod TV's World Edition, soon to be part of the Roku network. Greeting you live from the All America city of Morrisville in North Carolina in the United States of America. And on this show, we talk about global affairs, innovation, and what we can do to continue to navigate through a stormy and turbulent time in the history of our nation, the United States of America, and the history of the world. Today, I want to focus my monologue on a trip the president is making and a speech he's expected to make very soon in Atlanta, where he's going to be talking about making sweeping changes in voter protections and voter laws. He's getting much pressure from voter activists that the president simply has not done enough, and it's time. It's time to get through the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Act. Most of the folks are asking him to actually change the mail-in voting laws, establishing national standards, and putting back in many procedures that enabled the Voting Rights Act that were eliminated from the Voting Rights Act. In order to do all this, however, the president needs to do a filibuster, which means he wants to change the rules of the filibuster so that you no longer would need a 60-person majority to pass voting rights legislation. The challenge is getting Senators Manchin and Sinema on board, but Democrats are getting impatient, and they say it's time for the president to do it and to do it now. All this happens while the president is dealing with concerns about the future of American democracy, so closely after the anniversary of the insurrection on the Capitol of January 6th, 2021. Let's also keep in mind that the president is dealing with President Trump loyalists, former President Trump loyalists being named on election boards, and also many states changing their election rules and procedures so they can change the outcomes of elections. Enough is enough. Speeches are enough, what the activists are saying. And so the time has come for him to make change. Also, people are asking Vice President Harris to step up. As the first Black woman Vice President of the United States, they believe she has an obligation to be more vocal on this issue. I could go on, but I want to close my monologue on this point. As President Biden said, he believes that this is when a time in the nation's history, in a nation's presidency, when time stops and focus must be on the essential. I repeat those words, time stops and focus on the essential in terms of democracy of the United States of America. In the history of our nation, that's happened before. When President Lincoln was able to vote through the the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was able to pass through the New Deal during a World War II and the Depression, or when President Lyndon Baines Johnson was able to work with even Southern Democrats who didn't agree with him for voting rights acts to get Voting Rights Act legislation passed. And we are celebrating very soon the Martin Luther King Jr. celebration birthday. And we know that from that civil rights movement came many great leaders like John Lewis, the late John Lewis, Andrew Young, Jesse Jackson, and many other great American leaders, some of them alive today, who devoted much of their adult lives to focus on voting rights. We remember the March to Selma, which was portrayed in the movie, where we saw people in Alabama march for that right to vote. Perhaps the President Biden is correct. Time must stop, and America must focus on the essential. Will he be able to get and amend the filibuster rules? We will soon see. Democracy, once again, facing many tests on many fronts. And today we'll be discussing that on this show. With me today, I have with us Mark Lee, my co-host, Sasha Starr from Down Under.
We're going to see when Sasha and some of the other folks
Canada.
decide to show up and everything. But I was hearing what you were saying, and hopefully they'll be joining us very shortly. But apparently one of the influential Democrats is going to be missing from that speech and everything, because apparently Stacey Abrams has a schedule conflict.
Sometimes I forget things in my monologue, but I figured, Stacey Abrams is not going to be there. John Ossoff and Senator Warnock will be there. President Biden and Vice President Harris will be at Ebenezer Baptist Church laying the wreath. So It'll be
Yeah,
interesting.
and apparently Mark Meadows, and I think Mark Meadows has some ties to this area, if I remember correctly. But he was making a little bit of a dig. He said, "There's bad, and then there's gubernatorial candidate in a state you carried cancels on you bad." So that's what he was saying, or that's apparently what he tweeted, and definitely said that and everything along those lines. So that was interesting that that comment was made, and of course there'll be some tit for tat, just like there'll be some tit for tat about the fact that AOC apparently came down with COVID after having gone to Miami and attended a party there. And apparently she was maskless. So I'm sure there'll be some tit for tat around that over the next weeks and all of that in that sense as well. By the way, speaking of Georgia, I did want to give a shout out to
Oh,
our national champion, the Georgia
yes.
Bulldogs. I did watch that game last night into the wee hours of the morning and everything, and it was a very exciting game, a very tight game until the end when they blew it out and won by like about what amounted to almost two touchdowns and all of that. But it was a very tight game and a very good game. And of course, Nick Saban has won many titles, so he doesn't have anything to be ashamed of. But it took 41 years, or almost 42 years, because it was 1980, the last time that Georgia won a national championship. Vince Dooley was their coach, I believe, at that time, and he was actually in the stands at the game. And I want to say that I was in high school. So that ought to tell you how long ago that was and everything. So I was actually in high school and a high school senior in 1980. So that would have been my high school senior year. So that was a very long time ago that that happened and all
Yeah, I
of
didn't
that.
realize it was that long. Herschel Walker, and I was going to mention that in my close today. But yeah, congratulations. I was rooting for Alabama. I got married in Alabama. My family, my in-laws, grew up and raised their family in Montgomery for about 12 years. Got married on Maxwell Air Force Base. And or got married on the Air Force Base. Can't remember whether it was Gunter or Maxwell, but I've always been sort of that's sort of like my third home. My first home is West Virginia. My second home is Delaware, where I went to high school, and then obviously, well, Georgia. I went to Emory, and then met my wife, who was from Alabama. I got married in Alabama, so I was actually, believe it or not, sort of torn, but I was always pulling for Alabama. And
Well,
I
that was
went to
kind of
bed early. I went to bed. I couldn't stay up that late, and but I watched the highlights in the morning. So
there's nothing wrong with watching those highlights and everything along
yeah, I
those
couldn't
lines.
stay up that. I didn't want to stay up till 12:30 at night. I can't do it anymore. So,
Well,
but
there's a
it was
major city that is actually, yeah, it was a very good game. And like I said, I was probably because I know a couple of friends of mine that are Alabama fans that I was probably, if I'm being honest, rooting for them. But like I said, I do know some people that were Georgia fans as well, and I definitely have some folks that work in Georgia, so I didn't have any problem with Georgia winning. But yeah, I was kind of hoping that Alabama would win. I actually liked their quarterback and a couple of other things, but definitely it was a good game. And even though the teams that I was rooting for didn't win, and I really didn't have any true dog in the fight, I was all right with them winning. And it's very hard to beat a team three times in a year, and that's what they would have managed having to do if they had won the national championship. So I really had this kind of feeling that Georgia would probably win and everything. One of the things I was curious, and I don't know what other ideas you got to talk about, and I'm hoping Sasha and them will join, because one of the things I want to bring up is something that I found out about his area of the world and all of that. So hopefully he'll join us. Otherwise, I'll bring it up and maybe we'll continue to talk about it on next on tomorrow and everything. And I know you've got possibly a guest coming in very soon
we're
to
gonna move
talk.
it to we're gonna move it to April because his name's Andy Andrews and he got inducted in the USTA Tennis Hall of Fame, but because of COVID, it got delayed till April. So I
Okay.
told him we'll just move him. We'll move him, but he is a world champion. Got as high as 50 in the world. One of the best tennis players in North Carolina history. Before John Isner, played at NC State. Played the Wimbledon doubles and U.S. Open doubles with John Sadri. Became the board member of USTA. He's a developer now and resigned for personal reasons. He was going to become the CEO of USTA chairman and stepped down. And but he's a real advocate for tennis, and so he's getting inducted in the Tennis Hall of Fame. So it's a great
Mm,
moment. But we'll move that to April. I'll lock it in. And
mm, mm.
speaking of tennis, although Novak Djokovic did get relieved to be able to play, and he's hitting the practice courts today, uh, he might be facing deportation issues now. So he's
Right.
got a lot going on in addition to worrying about his forehand and return to serve. I just don't know. Hopefully he'll get through it. And but he's having to do a lot of mental pressures in addition to just, you know, having
In
to worry
addition
about the
to,
little yellow ball.
yeah,
You know,
there's a little, worrying about the tennis ball and everything. But the Chicago Teachers Union on Monday, so that would have been yesterday, agreed to accept a deal that will allow schools to reopen on Wednesday after 4 days of cancellations over instructors refusing to teach in person amid a COVID-19 spike following the holidays. So last week, teachers staged a walkout in support of the union's call for a temporary return to virtual learning due to high infection rates and what they say are a lack of mitigation measures. And on Sunday, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot condemned the walkout as illegal and accused teachers of abandoning students and parents. So they're having a little bit of things going on with the whole thing about returning back, but it does look like they will be heading back to class there in a major U.S. city, that being Chicago. So that is something that I found quite interesting, and all of that in the sense of some of the news items that I was learning about and all of that. And I did hear that apparently, and that's where I was hoping that Sasha will be here, and if he comes in, we can talk about it. But apparently, the U.S. has issued a do not travel warning for Canada. Because
yes.
apparently there's been a little bit of a, I guess, a spike in that part of the world and everything. So there is something that is new. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have deemed Canada very high risk for travel on Monday as the State Department issued a level 4 warning. So the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and U.S. State Departments on Monday advised against traveling to neighboring Canada because of a rising number of COVID-19 cases as the Omicron variant spreads. The CDC elevated its travel recommendation to level 4, which is very high for Canada, telling Americans that they should avoid travel, while the State Department also on Monday issued its level 4 advisory for Canada, citing those COVID-19 cases. And of course, Canada does remain a top foreign destination for Americans. And the Canadian Foreign Minister, Melanie Joly, said that we are aware of the latest CDC advice, noting that last month Ottawa had urged residents against non-essential travel as well. So hopefully they're going to get better and folks can get on up there and travel to that part of the world as well. And there's some other parts of the world that got similar warnings. The CDC on Monday also lowered travel recommendations from level 4 to level 3 high for Armenia, Belarus, Lithuania, and Zimbabwe. It also rates Singapore as level 3 after it was previously listed as unknown. So there's parts of the world that I guess we're doing worse with the Omicron, and therefore the CDC and others are saying whether you should travel to them or not. I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Well, I think you're going to just see these restrictions in travel as we deal with this. A million cases a day in the U.S. It's ramping all over the world. And I think that going to continue to see it disrupt our lives. Tonight, I have my first council meeting of the new year. Never thought
Wow.
in 2022 would be a virtual meeting. I do not enjoy the virtual meetings. It's hard when you are. I've got a bunch of Zoom meetings, lots of writing and things I'm doing today for my job after this engagement, and it's hard to be on a computer screen for another 4 hours, getting out at around 10:30 at night. It makes it for a long day.
Oh, I'm
And
sure it makes for
yeah, yeah. So I just don't enjoy it, and I would almost be better off just either doing it in person or just holding off and doing the meetings until you get back. Because after about 2 hours, 3 hours, I just start losing my attention span. So I'm going to try
so
to
people are very much
I'm
interested in
going to
that and everything.
try to take a nap today and get my rest. I got a couple of documents I got to knock out, and then you know I can just do what I can to bear through it. But let's get to voting again before we get to some other issues. But I think at the end of the day it comes down to amending the filibuster rule. Someone just put a question on my Facebook who's obviously more conservative that Steve, are all these facts true that you keep saying democracy is threatened? And I'm just reporting the facts. My statements have nothing to do with whether you're a Democrat or Republican. But the fact of the matter is, in Georgia, in Arizona, in Michigan, there have been efforts made to change the laws on the books, taking away power from the Secretary of State to give it in Arizona to the Republican Attorney General, reducing Brad Raffensperger's partner powers in Georgia, doing the same in Michigan. And all of this is to use the state control of the legislature or the state laws to change election procedures. That's why I think it's very important that there are national standards across the board for mail in voting, for early voting, for perhaps even election oversight. I love this idea. We've talked about independent districting commissions. Maybe there should be independent election commissions that are overseeing, you know, that would prevent, the laws to be superseded by, by state efforts. And and we haven't talked a lot about the other things, voter ID, uh, some of the voting rights laws in Texas and the voting laws that were passed in Georgia. These are upheld from the Supreme Court. So as you're dealing with, so we have to make sure that there's certain issues where we can come together. We've done it before in our country's history. Whether it's Lincoln, whether it's LBJ, whether it's FDR, we can come together today to pass voting rights legislation that makes sense for everybody. And I'm still looking to answering the naysayers out there. I'm looking for the evidence that there was election fraud. If you can show me that there was fraud, then I'll say that maybe you are right. But I have seen no evidence on the books of any election fraud um, that I can see of in where we live in North Carolina. So I just don't understand. Are they looking at a different data source, or um, I just don't understand.
I mean, part of it is probably speculation on their part. Part of it is probably the study of history, because we do know that there have been times that there have been some things that have had election fraud in the past. I went to school in Milwaukee, so I oftentimes think about Daley and what was going on in Chicago historically and all of that. And of course, there have been other places. New York is just as bad. And of course, there were places in the South that definitely had some of those things historically. So I think that some people may be trying to put historical context in the sense of modern day times. But we do have our friend Sasha in, so I was going to bring him in for the conversation. How are you doing, Sasha? Glad to have you here on this morning and everything. We've been talking about the CDC as well as, of course, the voter situation and Biden trying to push some efforts in that sense of, I know some people were wanting the John Lewis bill to pass and things along that line. So that's kind of where the conversation has been going so far. I don't know how much you heard in the time that you got on and everything, but if you've got any things that you want to lend to those two conversations, I did mention that the U.S. has put that do not travel warning on Canada. And so that was something that I just saw come through the news because of the rise in cases there in your country and everything. But I didn't know if you had any insights that you want to add to either of those topics. And of course, there's some other topics that we'll probably get to as well.
Okay, yes, this travel advisory is absolutely correct. The number of cases in Canada is rising for the last several weeks. It's mostly, I understand, it's Omicron variation, and although it's not deadly by all means, not that people are not dying at all. Probably there are some deaths, but nothing to compare to Delta or other alpha variations. However, I've heard in France now there is a combination of Omicron and Delta. So they call it Delta Omicron variation. And so far, it's very little known about that, how it works and how little it is. So in that case, the less you travel, the better. Although it's awful because it's now going to be a third year practically with no travel.
Yeah.
It's very, very tough. And but what can you do? Just to ignore everything and just travel somewhere, get your coronavirus or Omicron or whatever other variety it is, get sick for a few days, maybe even die, and that's alternative. So people have to choose really.
Yes.
What is their choice?
Yep.
You know,
Absolutely.
yeah, I
Yep.
hear you. There was a story coming out of New York about was they had a recent apartment fire in the Bronx, but it raised questions about safety doors, the lack of sprinklers, and the fire escapes. And I was just wondering, and this is a question for both of you, how much of those kind of things do you think are being lost in this whole concern about a very major pandemic, things around housing safety? I know that even in the middle of this pandemic, there was a whole thing going on with one of our housing projects here that involved like some mold and some other things, and that was happening during the pandemic here in Durham, North Carolina. But I was just wondering, do you feel that there is enough of an effort nationally and even internationally to make sure that things are being done safely in the sense of the way things are being built? Because there is an absence of construction workers. Because as I reported yesterday, there's like, multiple hundreds of thousands of jobs available and everything. But I was wondering, do we feel that there's enough inspections going on to make sure that things are being built correctly? So maybe I'll ask you first, Steve, since you're in a city.
Well,
But I
it's
did.
funny. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Just in December of this year, we had a very interesting event called Deck the Halls Fire Safety Event, where we invited a very advanced sprinkler system to show how a sprinkler system could immediately put out a fire if used appropriately, versus the heat that would get as quickly as a few minutes got to 200 degrees within a house. They had a living room, two living rooms, and they showed you what would happen if how quickly. So you definitely there needs to be more training about people for fire. One thing I've learned from our fire department, for example, we recently just last year had a house completely burned to the ground, not too far from the greenway where I run almost every other day, and it was an electrical fire. A house, family had three children, and what they found was that one thing that saved the family was that the bedroom doors were closed,
Mm,
so that the kids would have died if the doors were open. So you'd think a door is thin, but a door, our firefighters say that when you keep those doors shut, it really will prevent the fire from out. Know what your fire escapes are. Make sure that you get a fire inspection. In our town, you can get a fire inspection to just make sure that there's any concerns out there. Any unusual smells that you may smell, you need to check it out. One thing I've gotten good about is when I'm doing my laundry or having the dryer on, just go make sure you take it off. Don't think, well, I'm just going to run to the store and come back, because there could be an electrical outlet, and it takes literally a minute to 2 minutes, and you could be done.
right.
Right? That's what
Yeah.
in
Any
terms
thoughts
of
on that from
inspections.
I don't know what kind of just home safety measures you take and everything, but do you have any thoughts on that in your own life, Sasha, just in terms of maybe home measures that you and your wife take, and maybe even some of the things that you heard about that folks are doing there in Canada in terms of being safety oriented, even during this time of a pandemic?
Well, safety is considered to be a very important issue in apartment complex where I live. It's condominiums north of Toronto. We have fire drills once in a while, like every second month or so, plus inspection of all these systems in place. So far, we were lucky; we never had it. I'm living here for now 11 years. We never had any problems whatsoever, and hopefully it will remain so. And actually, at this situation where we are now with coronavirus and travel restrictions, and well, I remember, by the way, collapse of the building in Florida, where a lot of it, unfortunately, deaths were happened. We live in a situation where survival is number one concern. Whatever you do, your ability to survive and your willingness to survive and do everything possible to do that, that's so far the most important virtue. And I think since you have only one life, so your survival skills, ability, and willingness to do anything to survive is probably the most important virtue right now. So therefore, all the inconveniences of not be able to travel or going to enjoy some sport games or some other stuff, well, you have priorities, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. So we were talking before we get to some other world events. We were talking about the voting rights legislation, Sasha, and President Biden is really making a case that they're going to try to get the filibuster changed so that they could get actual voting rights legislation passed. The filibuster is a rule we have in the United States, for those of you watching around the world, that requires there to be a majority 60 votes in order to make any changes in the Senate. This would actually lower that requirement. And the Democrats and the activists were saying it has to be done. Um, any thoughts about that in terms of, do you think it's okay to not bend the rules, but to make sure that you can actually get things done, rather than having to have this filibuster rule all the time?
Well, I think that what is the purpose of election? Election is what allows people to get the result what they're voting for, and if they voted for a majority of Senate, or it's not a real majority, but effectively it is, because if they have 50 Democrats and the vice president breaks the tie, so then effectively you can control Senate. Unfortunately, with a filibuster, it's not enough. So you have majority, but you don't control it because you need 60 votes. And obviously, most of the cases, especially like situation is so polarized right now that even to get 51 vote is a problem. Never mind 60. So there, how you can govern if you cannot, you have so-called majority, yet you cannot really put any change in place. So I think that the filibuster is something. It could be said that if, for example, Republicans will get control of the Senate, so it would be a disadvantage for Democrats not to have filibuster. So, but it has to be done with, in my opinion, simply because while you have whoever party has majority cannot effectively rule, because these days 60 votes is unachievable. Doesn't matter about what the vote is; it's just not there.
Yeah,
I agree.
I agree. I mean, and these senators are Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin, blocking these efforts, and I think this is a real test for the president. I mean, in terms of, I think after 1 year, people are getting it to the point they want to know what are the specific things that he's able to do, and I think he's not going to mention President Trump in his speech today, but I think the fact that he mentioned him, in his speech last week on the anniversary of the insurrection shows that he is really working on doing what he can to take this on for what it is. Meanwhile, while he's doing that at home, shifting the focus abroad, we still have the situation in the Ukraine
Mhm.
with pressure intensifying on really no progress made on whether Ukraine should join NATO or not. Obviously, Putin would be against that, and no real progress on that. We just talked about Djokovic's, Novak's now facing deportation, although he is hitting the practice courts today. That's going to be interesting, and not sure if Zverev and Medvedev are happy about him not practicing as much because he's worrying so much about that. Oh, the other thing is Mike Pence is going to be a key witness for the House committee investigating the January 6th riots, and Clay Aiken, a former
Mhm.
American Idol, is running for the United States Congress. So is it time for the celebrities to get back in the game? Second time he's running. Mark, do you think that Clay Aiken is a viable candidate? Or do you think it's more noise?
I just think it's more noise. I don't see him as a viable candidate for what I've heard and everything along those lines. I mean, I could be surprised, and maybe he's got a machine that I don't know about, but I just think that it's more noise of a celebrity jumping in to the race. And I would even argue that he's probably at this point a B or a C celebrity. I wouldn't even put him in the A celebrity game, because definitely there have been talks about some of those running. I mean, there's still talks at some levels of Kanye West running for president again. So that's still out there as well. So, like I said, I just see that as being noise unless they get a certain machine behind them and get something that will put some legs behind it and things along those lines. Even if he uh, wins the primary. I just don't see him as a viable candidate at this particular time. Like I said, I could be pleasantly surprised, and I know a lot of folks will give him some leeway because of his celebrity status. But at the end of the day, I think people will be trying to figure out what is he actually going to do. And like I said, if he should get the office, what his platform will be and things of that nature. So while we've had celebrities that have won on their celebrity status, at some level, they did have to bring some agenda to it and everything. I think about Jesse Ventura, who was definitely had office and was a major wrestler there in Minnesota and everything. And of course, we all know that Ronald Reagan and others use their celebrity status as well to get into office. Think that even Clint Eastwood held an office at one point or another. So definitely it can be a benefit, but all three of those that I just mentioned had a little bit of a machine behind them, so they were able to use their celebrity status, but also had some other sort of agendas behind them as well. And as far as I know, all three of them, while I may not have agreed with their governance styles, they definitely seem to have brought some good knowledge of how to run a government into their job when they change jobs and things along those lines. But that's just my immediate thoughts about Clay Aikens as a candidate. I did have a quick question for Sasha and everything. Well, actually, two quick questions because it's based on some things that are dear to his heart and everything. But one of them is about the market and the economic market here in the United States. I know that they're saying that the bond market could definitely be making a statement that could influence what happens in our economy. And they're saying that in the next week, there are going to be some key inflation reports that we should be looking forward to and all of that because we're in the middle of the fourth quarter earning period. And apparently we're waiting for some reports from places like JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo. So from an economic standpoint, since we do know that we've got inflation going on and everything, what is your thoughts as an investor about how the U.S. economy is going right now and what impact it is having on the world economy?
U.S. economy is doing fine. Its impact on world economy is much lesser than it used to be before. There are some strong economies outside of the United States which are doing really well on its own, never mind China, but there is also Germany, Japan. They have very well run economies on their own. Um, the market is, in my opinion, much more difficult than last year, or even more than a year and a half, almost 2 years actually, starting March, April of 1990, 2020, up till now. So now market is, remember, there is no such thing as a stock market. It's a market of stocks. So if you're buying randomly choosing stock, your chances like a lottery, and you may lose actually quite a bit of money. But if you're very selective in your buying, the preservation of capital is one of the most important thing, because essentially all your success is based on the capital that you employ in the market. Once your capital decreases, so your ability to sustain your participation in the market is also going down big time. So preservation of capital is extremely important. I still say same thing as I say on our financial shows, that high yield dividend stocks is a core of your portfolio. And even with the latest turmoil on the market, the dividend stocks did very well, because that's where the people are running for safety.
Sorry,
And
guys, I'm being attacked by a cat.
yes,
Those things happen sometimes and everything. So definitely when we're doing live shows. But speaking of being attacked by a cat, Uh, Steve, I was just wondering because I was having a conversation. I went up to the corner store. This might have been 2 or 3 days ago. I was talking to a gentleman. Actually, I think he's a pretty successful business owner, but he's always playing the lottery. And I was asking him yesterday how he's done, and apparently he's done quite well on some cases. I think he said that he's won as much as 250,000 or something along those lines, and he's definitely won multiple. Big yields. He's also lost big yields. But I was just wondering, what are your thoughts, since we do have it here in North Carolina, of the lottery and people constantly playing it? Because, like I said, I think this man plays just about on a daily basis. And
Well,
like I
you
said,
never, yeah, I'm just not a big fan of that. I mean, I have such bad luck with those kind of things, but why not play the chances? It could be your lucky day. One concern I have about the lottery is when they did pass it in our state, they said it was called the education lottery, but the
mhm,
education lottery, the educational establishment sees very little about that money, and a lot of it in the 2000s was gone on to pay the debt and the money that the state needed. So I feel like I'd like to see more of that money. Maybe it's changed, but I'd like to see more of that money going into education. So from that perspective, if that were the case, then the more people that play the lottery, the better, because more revenue coming in, right? And so we could put that in the roads, and we talk about infrastructure a lot, but what infrastructure investments can the state make to advance, infrastructure? So I think this is critical moving forward, and we haven't really talked a lot about the Build Back Better, whether that's going to come back. I think President Biden does want to bring that back if he can get Manchin back on board with any kind of opportunities, right?
yeah, that makes sense. Hey, Sasha, does that something that they have in Canada? Do they play the lottery there? I'm not even sure if Canada has a national lottery or anything along those lines. I know the United States has got it scattered throughout the 50 states, but I'm not sure what Canada's thoughts are about lotteries.
There are lotteries available, provincial and the government, federal government lottery. In my opinion, it's a taxation for the poor people, really. Your chances are much less than similar wages. Chances in casino, for example, if you have $100 to blow away, your chances in casino way much better than in lottery. You can $100. It's difficult to invest $100 in stocks, but I think casino is probably a better alternative. However, for the last couple of days, I was preoccupied with, especially yesterday, there were a lot of news about this talks in Geneva between Russians and US. Um, See, the problem with this is that the level of people on both sides were fairly low, so to speak. So there was, you could treat them as the exploration talks or some kind of warm-up talks, or I don't know, for whatever it's worth. But they were not only inconclusive, they were just voiced their concerns, their positions, but nothing new really happened, and it's really non-event. However, the other thing what I just discovered yesterday, there was a meeting, face-to-face meeting between New York prosecutors and judge in Trump's case. And apparently, there was very, very interesting observation of the judge. What he was saying is that if Trump didn't really ask his people to go and attack the Capitol Hill, and he didn't mean it. So when he was watching for almost 3 hours how that horrible thing on January 6th happened, he would immediately went on national television, and he would, one way or another, he would ask these people to stop and leave peacefully. He failed to do so. So he must have been um, in agreement with the action of these people on January 6th. Never mind that he enjoyed that, just to see how these people fighting for Mr. Trump. So that issue is basically, at least for now, it's gone, and I think that he's very close to be indicted right there. It's just a matter of maybe weeks, maybe even earlier.
It's interesting you say that because I know that I was reading an article in Politico, which is a online magazine. I think it may even be a physical magazine as well. And one of the things that they were talking about was how there is a they feel that we're in the middle of a civil war, but they were arguing that the civil war is a different type of civil war because of the civil war, the historical civil war was around slavery and things of that nature. Some of the other things that they've mentioned as being very much civil wars were around issue oriented things like the New Deal, where some people liked what FDR was trying to do in terms of shifting the power between public and private sectors, and that there were other things going on, like, of course, the whole thing around whether we should have been in the Vietnam War or not. And there was a whole conversation around that. So it was very much issue oriented kind of things that were pushing the conversation. Whereas what the article was arguing was that this particular civil war seems to be that people just don't like each other. There seems to be like a very psychological divide between those that are big time Trump supporters and those that are the activists on the other side as well. So
No, I
what do you think
disagree.
your
I
thoughts were
disagree.
about this theme or this theory that it's just a different kind of divide, and it's a very scary kind of divide because at least in the other ones, while people were definitely dying over the Civil War and over even like, well, I don't know how much it was in the New Deal, but definitely that was during the Depression, but definitely around the Vietnam War, there was a lot of deaths and people running to different things. But this seems to be a different type of division going on. And I've heard people even saying that with things going on around division points, like Roe versus Wade, vaccine versus not vaccine, things of that nature. But I just wonder, is this a different type of world that we're living in now? And I'd love to hear both of your thoughts about that.
Yes, it is different, and I disagree with you on the purpose of this so-called war. Or there could be real war, and I think it should be real war, and the sooner it will happen, the better. You see, the Democratic Party really reflects quite well on what America is today. It's a very diversified country with different races, different culture, different. There are progressive democratic people, there are conservative democratic people, and so on. Now, what is Republican Party is owned and done by Trump. It's a Trump party. All these people who were fighting him at the beginning, like Ted Cruz, Rubio, McConnell, and so others, they're all his servants.
Mhm.
So it's not a Republican Party. It's a party of one man, Mr. Trump. And the objectives of this party. Now, he was very skillful to build his base,
Mhm.
and he is doing anything and everything possible to please his base. And nobody will run against him because nobody can acquire that base that belongs today 100% to Mr. Trump. Nobody can move that unless
Right.
Trump is indicted and especially thrown to jail finally. So in this case, there would be a really run, and yet, and the Republicans would have to reinvent themselves. They will have to declare that everything what Trump has done is a criminal, it's wrong. They will never do it again. They will do something completely different. Therefore,
Well,
but they
and I
will
think,
reinvent themselves.
and I want to take a stab at this question. I mean, I think, Mark, the reason that I'm concerned, I've been studying this a lot now, reading about it, is that we are headed towards a situation in this country where if what continues, just if you look at the changing the laws for elections, changing the outcomes of election, you could have a presidential election where part of the country, half the country believes that one president is their president and the other
Right.
president is their president. So the country is split. And what if that were to happen again and it got worse and there was more violent attacks on the Capitol? Because you're allowing state governments and let political parties decide the outcomes of elections, which could guarantee, which would, and the divisions are also on. We talked about vaccinations, we talked about
Right.
abortion, we talked about guns. I
Right.
think we also have to realize another point about America is that we are becoming an older nation while we're becoming, and Sasha did a great job talking about this, a diverse nation. So when my parents came from India in the late 60s, India was 60% over 60 and the rest of the population was under 35. Today, India is the opposite. 75% of the nation is under 30 years old in India. So it's a very young nation, where in America, the age is growing up because healthcare is keeping people alive longer, right? So what that means is in the urban areas, you're having much more diverse, more democratic cities. But in the rural areas, you tend to have not as many younger people, older people there. Most of them are Republicans, right, or Trump supporters, most of that base. And they think, well, we want an America where, we don't have to be embracive of LGBT, or we don't agree with this, or we don't agree with that. So you literally have two Americas within one nation, the United
Mhm.
States of America. And that's true in where we live in North Carolina. It's
Yeah.
two separate states. You have the urban areas like Durham, Charlotte, Raleigh, Wake County, right? Durham County. But then you have, Onslow County,
Mhm.
Carteret County, right? Counties where, and so how is it that in a state with such population control in the cities, would you be able to continue to elect a Republican legislature? Now, over time, that may change if the populations become so much that eventually, the Democrats, and I think that's happening in some states, that the desperation might be that they're realizing that there's an urbanization going on. Although, Sasha, do you believe that, and this is an interesting question because I heard an economist speak this week that said that the one thing that COVID could do is shift people going to urban areas to now saying, well, I'm comfortable in working in a more rural area, remote area, because I don't have to deal with the traffic. I still have internet. I still work. I don't have to go into work. So do you believe that could be a revival of like rural areas, and economically that could actually affect politically, that could have, if people start moving back to the rural areas, right? That could be.
I'm not so sure, because you can do all those things by staying in a center of the city, in an apartment or whatever you have, because internet is everywhere, so you can communicate. You can do just anything. Staying in the city, I really don't see big advantages in rural areas. You're becoming more isolated, and but you can have your isolation right where you are, because if you don't go anywhere, you don't see your neighbors, and basically you're just as isolated as you would be in a rural area. So I really don't see. I know that it's a popular movement these days to move somewhere, and same thing happened in Toronto, although not as much. Right now, it's kind of stabilized, and many people now are coming back to Toronto from
Yeah.
suburbs.
Well, and I
Yeah,
think
well,
that,
but
go
that's what
ahead.
I was going to say. I don't know so much about moving toward the rural areas. That might be going a little bit on the opposite extreme and everything. But I have heard, I mean, even one of the major networks talked about it on Sunday and everything, that people are moving toward what you just described, more of the smaller cities or the suburban areas, because the cost of living is a lot cheaper in those areas. Because, like I said, if you're going to pay something ridiculous in San Francisco or New York, you might as well move to Greenville. And like you just said, Sasha, you can do that work even for the Silicon Valley companies from that place that is going to have a cheaper cost of living, whether that's the way what you're going to pay for your goods, what you're going to pay for your rent, what you're going to even pay for your services and everything. That's why there are some people that are literally moving. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday. They were talking about how several of their friends are moving from various big cities in California, like Sacramento, like LA and stuff like that, to various cities in Texas, like Austin and other places that they feel are have a cheaper cost of living. And Greenville is becoming a very popular place to move to. Greenville, South Carolina, that is. And there's some other places that are smaller in that sense. So I do think that that is what it is happening, is that people are having another migration. We know that there have been great migrations in the past, and it does seem like there is a new migration toward more of a lower cost, smaller cities and suburban areas that is taking place now, and that people are observing in that sense.
Plus, don't forget that some people are moving to Texas from California just for political considerations. So all that together, yeah, there is a movement, and a lot of people are moving from California to Texas, for example. And so let be it. I mean, people believe that their life will be better in Texas, and their political system is more to their liking. It's great if they can afford pack their
Right.
things and move on.
Yeah. Um,
Absolutely.
Hey, for both of you, I did see that the U.S., and this is going to really be something that I know a lot of folks are going to be maybe glad about, but a lot of folks are going to be highly upset about it. But apparently, the U.S. is going to be providing $308 million in humanitarian aid for the people of Afghanistan. And the National Security Council announced that earlier today, as well as additional COVID-19 vaccine doses. So, what is your thoughts, both of you, about when we supposedly win in a war, and then we turn around and we have a whole lot of money to the people that we supposedly beat. So, like I said, this sounds like a whole lot of money going towards this area and everything. But I was just wondering your thoughts and whether that's just something that we should be doing, and whether we're even sure that it's going to the causes that they say it's going to, because they're saying that it's going to go through various independent humanitarian organizations, and it is supposed to help with life-saving protections and shelter, winterizations, emergency food, and a lot of the other things that humanitarian things are supposed to do.
I think it's a great deal for US because for
Yeah.
lousy $8 million, it's buying publicity worth hundred millions of dollars. So how 8 million can be reflected on what it means for U.S. budget and long-term planning or so on. It's really nothing. It's
I think
less
yeah.
than 10 cents for you.
I think any of if the money is going to good causes, whether it's healthcare, vaccinations, helping with food, then I think it's fine. But I think yeah, the question becomes how much bang are you going to get for your buck, literally speaking. And
Right.
and once again, I think it's throwing money at the problem, throwing troops at the problem, isn't going to help strengthen democracy. We've talked about the idea it's advanced citizenship. It's not easy, and we're having issues here at home, but all around the world, we're seeing um, nationalism increase to unify nations. I think Modi is doing this in India. Putin's doing this in Russia. We're going to be bringing Swadesh Chatterjee on for Indian Republic Day in a couple of weeks to talk about democracy in India and why the U.S.-India relationship is important. But there are people concerned about India slipping away from the kind of democracy that we thought, with targeting certain religious minorities and things like that. Um, one final thing, but before we get closer to closeout,
Mhm.
from an economic perspective, what I'm hearing from economists, the theme I'm hearing is that now it's really going to be about a Federal Reserve policy that would make it harder to borrow money and reduce the money supply, which would mean a rise in interest rates. And that worked in 1979 when Carter did that. He appointed Paul Volcker, the head of the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and that's what they did to fight inflation. So hopefully, and Sasha, I don't know what your perspective is on that. Is that something that you think obviously they've talked about it, whether they're going to do that, and economically, the stock markets that we're seeing here, are the values inflated, or are we going to see stock prices come back down, right? But that's a time, that's a
Yeah.
conversation for your show.
That's exactly why this environment is very challenging, what we are doing with what we see in stocks. The year started very slow. Actually, many of the Nasdaq stock were down big time. They are trying a little bit of a recovery today, but very unconvincing. And in my opinion, the stock will go down yet for a year, yet another day today. And another thing is that a lot of people got into the market quite late last year or so on, and it seems to me that stocks want to be in the hands of strong people instead of weak people. So I think it's a shakedown of weak hands, and unfortunately, it will take another few days to clean up all those weak hands out of market, and then it could resume its movement up. But this year is not going to be easy anyway.
Yeah, it's not going to be an easy year in the least bit. One of the interesting things, and I know that Nick had said that he wanted to do a special on this maybe sometime next week and everything. Of course, we still got our thing about the world's worst presidents that'll be coming your way tomorrow at 7. But one of the scary things to think about historically is that some of the issues that were brought up some 50 years ago or something like that are still the issues of today. I'm actually a big fan of one of the books that Martin Luther King Jr. wrote called Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? And some people would say that that's probably what we're in the middle of right now, is some of the same discussions that he was talking about some 50 years ago or something along those lines, whether it was around housing, whether it was around race relations, whether it was around a number of other things that he was very much talking about, even the way that we handle our role within the world and all of that, and the environment, because he talked about all of that. And the last time that there was um, one of the last times that there was a major insurrection, and it actually involved the death of some representatives, actually was when some Puerto Rican terrorists went into the House gallery and shot some folks dead at that particular. Well, I'm not sure if he shot them dead, but they definitely shot them at a event that was around Puerto Rican independence, which is still something that is being dealt with to this particular time. So that's something we're going to have to just think about and maybe have some conversations around about how a lot of the issues that were supposed to have been solved during these several decades are still very much in the news and are still very much unresolved, including what's going to happen with Puerto Rico and those issues that Dr. King was concerned about, that even the modern day politicians are concerned about as well. So just a quick thought that I had as I
Mark,
was.
it's much more concerning than Puerto Rico issue. The fact that in the last few days I had correspondence with one very esteemed U.S. citizen, with top-notch professional, except that he is hardcore Republican. And by discussing the issues back and forth, and I sent him one article from Economist, which is a worldwide followed magazine, and he said that Economist is a liberal propaganda magazine, and he's not reading anything whatever is published there. So apparently, when I started to I've discovered one interesting thing. He listens and reads only Fox News. There is no other publication that he would touch. It includes Wall Street Journal, An Economist, ABC, NBC, CNN, just anything else. So there's apparently good, probably half and half, one half is in a Fox ecosystem, whether it's news, television, doesn't matter what, and another everything else. And looks to me that Fox is very influential if they can convince so many people that all other networks are doing all put together, then kudos to Fox. They are doing fantastic thing. So and the ecosystems are completely different. The same fact they are commenting and create narrative is completely different one from another. So people are either in one ecosystem, Fox News, or another one, which includes almost anything else. And until that will remain to be so, never mind social media, which reinforces big time Fox News and all other networks and such.
Well,
That's why I'm very skeptical that issue of division in the United States can be solved so quickly.
yes, and that's a great way to segue into my closeout, where I go into the standard finals take, final jab, metaphoric style. And we just celebrated the Georgia Bulldogs winning a huge national championship, the first one in 40 years. And it reminded me of what we all feel when we feel and see progress. How great it feels to see a team come back in the fourth quarter with 2 touchdowns. And when we saw the quarterback move it down the field and get in the end zone, we felt great. We all love comeback stories. This one was, as the Georgia Bulldogs took out one of the most revered coaches in the history of our sport, probably the greatest college coach, Nick Saban. In many ways, I look at the analogy as that's the way we are in America today. The American people, I truly believe, want to see progress. They're tired of gridlock. They're tired of fighting. As Al Pacino said in Any Given Sunday, football is a game of inches. It's how willing you are to fight and die for that inch. In this case, I would say the inches could turn into miles, and we've traveled a lot of miles. We've walked a lot of marches. We've gathered together for fighting for rights to vote, for democracy, and we'll be celebrating MLK's birthday on Monday with special guest. I'm proud to announce former state senator for North Carolina, Floyd McKissick, and the son of Floyd McKissick Jr., a civil rights leader in America, one of Dr. Martin Luther King's closest friends and allies. We'll be talking to Senator McKissick, who's now chairman of the Utilities Board, on what that March to Freedom was like for his father, for Dr. King, and how we must remember that those marches were marathons, not sprints. I believe the American people today are dealing with a situation that needs attention. We need a win. We need a touchdown. We need to put scores on the board. We need to fight and claw for that inch of freedom that we have to inspire others around the world that we can do it. Call me an optimist, but I believe we're going to do it. We've done it before when our backs are against the wall. We all love comebacks, and I'm ready for the American comeback once again. A comeback to show that our republic is strong, that we're a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That's my closing remarks today. We look forward to Senator McKissick. We literally just confirmed Mark Lee and I will be extending the invitation. For those of you around the world, this will be a great opportunity to listen to a true icon, a true leader in North Carolina, but also who plays a very important role in the legacy of his father, who marched with Dr. King for civil rights in our nation. With that being said, I look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow as we continue our conversation. From our family to yours at Pod TV, we wish you safety wherever you are. This is Steve Rao live from the All-America city of Morrisville, wishing you a great, great day. Thank you all so much.